Lord, help us lock in as we go into your word tonight. I know that each and every one of us comes from different days where we have been distracted by all sorts of different stuff, God, but we have all landed in the same room right now. And I'm not just speaking for us who are present here, God, I'm speaking for people who are watching online as well. All of us are right here in this moment, God, so help us be free from distraction and help us draw near to you. May your Spirit be present with us, God, as we know he is. And help us not interpret the text according to our own human, finite understanding, God, but help us understand it as you would have it be understood. Help us interpret it as you want it interpreted. Help us apply it as you would have us apply it. And help us remember it, God, because we don't want to simply gather here and talk about stuff for hours on end and then just forget it, God. We don't want your word to fall to the ground or return void. We want to be transformed by it. Let us not simply be people who multiply words, but let us be people who hear your word and then go out and do it. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so just for those of y'all who are watching online, I've already talked to everybody else about this, but the game plan for tonight, we are going through 2 Kings chapter 12, and we're going to go through it probably a little bit quicker than we normally do, mainly because in addition to going through 2 Kings chapter 12 tonight, we're also planning on doing a bit of an overview of the book of Joel. And I kind of want to set aside an hour for each of those. Normally we spend about 2 hours going through each chapter of Kings, but rather than setting aside an entire week for the book of Joel, we're just going to kind of just split it in two, mainly because as we're going through the minor prophets, I'm wanting those to be more overviews and just very brief glimpses within like the broader context of Kings. But I do want Kings to be our focus, and so I don't want to like slow us down too much there, especially because we had a week off last week because of the snow and all that stuff. So that's the plan. And so for those of y'all who are watching online, this is probably going to be split into two videos. There's going to be a 2 Kings chapter 12 video, and there's also going to be a Book of Joel video, which probably comes out either at the same time or the next day. And so that's that. That being said, I'm going to give us some brief context real quick, a little bit briefer than normal. But that's because if you're in 2 Kings chapter 12, I imagine that you have probably been with us for a while because people very rarely start studying the Bible in 2 Kings chapter 12. But we are dealing with the divided kingdom of Israel, where I guess you can't even call it the divided kingdom of Israel. It's the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah, right? Israel is the northern kingdom composed of the 10 of the tribes. And then the southern kingdom is known as Judah, which is the two remaining tribes. You've got Judah as the big one, and then little Benjamin is also part of that. And basically, 1st and 2nd Kings details the fall of the golden age of Israel, right? If 1st and 2nd Samuel was the rise of the monarchy, 1st and 2nd Kings is the fall. And we basically have been pinballing back and forth between Israel and Judah, just seeing all the terrible things that are ultimately leading to its destruction. And I put this like table up here mainly because I showed this, I think, last time we were going through 2 Kings chapter 11, but it serves as a good reminder of the last several chapters we've gone through, because where we are currently at in 2 Kings is actually a shining moment in the midst of like this really sad story where we're actually getting to see what ultimately leads to both Israel and Judah's destruction by Assyria and Babylon, respectively. We do get to see a glimmer of hope in these chapters. You might not at first notice that because there's still just as much bloodshed and stuff as we've seen in other chapters. But what we see in chapters 9 and 10, we do get to see a little bit of reformation going on in the northern kingdom of Israel. And then in chapters 11 and 12, where we're at today, we actually get to see some reformation going on in Judah. The reformation in Israel was not complete. This was under a guy named Jehu. And Jehu, he is the best of the kings that comes from the northern kingdom, but he still isn't a good king, right? We know very little about his actual reign itself. What we mainly know about is like really the first year of his reign, and we get to see what all he accomplished, and he fulfilled prophecy and all this stuff, and it's really cool. But he's mainly a guy who just enacts a lot of vengeance. And so in addition to fulfilling prophecy, one thing that he does, which is honorable, is that he does destroy the temple of Baal in the northern kingdom of Israel, which is really cool. However, by the end of chapters 9 and 10, we did see that he still wasn't super great because he still participated in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, going way back to the founding of the northern kingdom about 100 years earlier. And so he's the best of them, but he's still not great. By contrast, whenever you go to chapters 11 and 12, of 2 Kings, we do get to see a figure who is actually really, really cool. And his name is Jehoiada. And Jehoiada is basically the counterpart, the southern kingdom counterpart to Jehu. But the main thing that sets Jehoiada apart is that, first off, he does not himself become king. And secondly, he has more motives than strictly vengeance, right? This guy is a priest who genuinely seems to want reformation to take place in the land. And there is never a point where he himself strives for power. And you actually get to see this. We didn't really talk about this last week. But one thing that's really neat about this, where you actually get to see the hope that is found in this story, is that for the first time since I think 1 Kings chapter 15 or something, in 2 Kings chapter 11, we actually have the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem being mentioned. This is something that we really haven't talked about a whole lot. But given whenever you're reading through 1 and 2 Kings, given how much focus is placed on the temple in the early chapters, you kind of get the impression that it's going to be like a really big driving force throughout the story. But that actually isn't the case, right? It's like it's mentioned for a while, and then all of a sudden, it isn't mentioned that much. And to be fair, that's because a lot of the end of 1 Kings and the beginning of 2 Kings is dealing with the northern kingdom. And so we're really focusing on Elijah and Elisha there. But another reason, as we're going to see in today's chapter, is because it doesn't seem like people were really focusing on the temple like they were supposed to, right? Solomon built this amazing thing. He dedicated it to God, and people were like, yeah, this is awesome. But fads die off quickly, and it seems like in general people were not giving the temple the amount of attention it deserved. And so where we're going to pick up with the temple here in chapter 12 is that it's in disrepair and it needs to be fixed. And so in chapter 11, we saw that Jehoiada, the priest, he stepped in and he actually was able to kind of set up a coup wherein he replaced a son of David on the throne of Judah. Right? This is a great-great-great-grandson of David. His name is Jehoash. He's only 7 years old when he becomes king, and he is going to reign for 40 years. And just that number in and of itself should give us hope, mainly because whenever we think of kings who reign for 40 years, who kind of comes to our mind?
Well, David, Saul, and Solomon.
Yeah, Saul, David, and Solomon. Each of the kings of the united monarchy reigned for 40 years. And so here we have this young kid named Jehoash being placed on the throne, and it seems like things are beginning to turn up, right? And so with that in mind, we're going to hop into chapter 12, and let's see what becomes of this young king named Jehoash. Sean, will you take it away?
Right. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. And Jehoash did what was right in the sight of Yahweh all his days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. Then Jehoash said to the priest, all the money of the sacred things which is brought into the house of Yahweh, both the money for each numbered man, the money from which each person's assessment in the census, and all the money which any man's heart prompts him to bring into the house of Yahweh. Let the priests take it for themselves, each from his acquaintance, and they shall repair the damages of the house, wherever any damage may be found.
All right, perfect. So what do we see happening just in those early verses there?
Tells the reign of Jehu. That's one thing I see.
So specifically, the reign of Jehoash. But it does put it in the context of Jehu. Who is Jehu?
Jehu is a king.
Yeah, just talked about him.
King in, I want to say, I think Israel, right?
Yes, he's the king in the northern kingdom, right? He's the one that we talked about in chapters 9 and 10, right? He was the one who was, he's ultimately the kind of a fearsome dude, right? He's the one who probably has the most blood on his hands, the most significant blood on his hands that we've seen in this story. He is the Messiah of the North. That's not what I like to call him because it's a cool title. But yeah, so in the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king. Wait, Jehoash? I thought we were talking about Joash. What's the deal there?
Same name.
It's the same name. It's like David versus Dave, or like Nick versus Nicholas. It's the same thing, right? And so in 2 Kings, they kind of just jump back and forth. I think it's kind of weird that they just jump back and forth like that, but that is what they do. So sometimes it's called Joash, sometimes it's Jehoash, same person. So in the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king. And keep in mind, how old is he?
7.
He's 7 years old. And the reason why is because keep in mind that 7 years earlier is when Jehu killed the previous king, right? And then that's whenever Athaliah, the queen mother, reigned for those 7 years.
She took power, killed the entire royal line of David except for Joash, who was in the way.
Yeah. So in the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. So how old is he going to be when he dies?
47.
47. Very good. Math. And his mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. Beersheba is a city way down south in the Negev desert. And Jehoash did what was right in the sight of Yahweh all his days. Wow. Isn't that exciting? Right? Oh, wait, the sentence isn't done. All his days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. All right, what do y'all think about that? This is a verse worth lingering on for a second, just before we go into the rest of the story.
It's clear that it outlines that Jehoash himself, he wasn't right by his nature. He was right by those who were advising him, specifically Jehoiada, who from the last chapter we can see is, about as righteous a man as there is in this time period in either kingdom. And it puts into context the things that for the time being, we'll see how Jehoiada is able to, kind of temper him.
Yeah.
But then when he goes,
Yeah, and I think that if you go read 2nd Chronicles, you read a lot more about Jehoash's fall than you do in 2nd Kings. In 2nd Kings, we're going to get hints of it in this chapter, but it's not going to linger on it as much. Whereas 2nd Chronicles actually is going to be a lot more critical of him, and it's going to break it all down. But just from a strictly literary perspective, I don't even know if it's just literary, maybe theological as well. I think it's really beautiful what's being highlighted here because I did mention that these chapters are some of the most hopeful in 2 Kings because you actually see reformation happening, right? There's going to be a few more reformations, right? Jehoash is going to be the first big reformer of Judah, and then there's going to be a few more later on. Josiah is going to be the best of them, and Josiah is almost going to be like Jehoash 2.0. That's why I always get it mixed up in my head, but. What I think is really cool about this is that, Jehoiada and Jehoash, they're almost like this dream team, to where, if you just, mix them together, you'd have the perfect person. But they're not, right? Because, Jehoiada, he's a priest, and, he is genuinely, like Nick was saying, he seems like a righteous dude, but he's not king. And so that's, the downside. It's okay, well, this guy honestly kind of deserves to be king, but instead he's just, an old priest who, he's just doing the right thing, but he doesn't have the power to actually cause, super duper significant change beyond, making sure that the king is safe and stuff. Whereas Jehoash, he literally is given, ideal circumstances, right? The way that he comes to the throne is by literally everybody surrounding him and, making sure that he is on the throne and everybody's hopes are placed in him. He's got, a good mentor figure, which is super rare. Going way back to 1st and 2nd Samuel, we have not really had good mentor figures, right? One thing that we've talked about is almost every single father figure in the stories of Samuel and Kings are bad. Jehoiada is the exception to that. To where it seems like Jehoash, he's got this perfect setup to be the ideal, son. And in many ways, the only person who had it more ideal is Solomon. Right, to where Solomon had David as a father, whereas Jehoash seems like he's in a close second, right? He's being raised up in the temple, almost like Samuel, right? Even though the temple wasn't there at the time, but you get what I mean, right? To where it seems like this is the perfect combination to produce the best king, but he's gonna fall short, and I think that that's part of what the author of Kings is trying to communicate, right? Even whenever everything seems perfectly aligned, the secret sauce is missing. To where you're thinking, man, there's surely one day a king will come who will be like a mixture of Jehoiada and Jehoash, right? To where it's like, maybe there's like this priest king figure who will, he'll be hunted down as a child, yet he will be spared. He will be raised up in secrecy, and then one day he will show up and he will claim his throne. And oh yeah, it's Jesus, right? To where I don't know. I think that's kind of cool. But practically speaking, main thing to highlight here, just because, like I said, verse 2 is worth kind of lingering on. On one hand, it's really cool that Jehoash did what was right in the sight of Yahweh all his days. Because that's like that's a thing that's like very rare. You don't see this at all in the northern kingdom. And it's very rare in the southern kingdom. So that's cool, but that last phrase really ruins it. Because it's not just all his days, it's all his days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. And I think practically speaking, what we're going to see here is something that is relevant even to us. This is like the classic case of, I don't know, I see this a lot just as a teacher at a private school. You've got students who, they go to the school and it seems like they're like gung-ho for Jesus. And then they graduate and go to college. And you realize, oh, they actually didn't really have faith in Christ. It was more just a matter of convenience, right? They were at a private school. Their parents were Christians. Okay, but they themselves were not like devoted to him. And then the moment they had a taste of freedom, they went and did their whole thing, right? It was more like they were a victim of their circumstances more than they were like true proponents of the faith. And Jehoash is going to be kind of like that, right? To where he's going to be a great king until Jehoiada dies. And when Jehoiada dies, you're going to see Jehoash on his own, and he's not going to be up to snuff. And this is just something that, practically speaking, we need to be aware of. This is why, whenever we talk about receiving Christ, we have to make it clear, all because your family's a Christian doesn't mean you're a Christian, right? It's a personal choice. And that's true every single day of our lives, right? All because you decided to follow Jesus yesterday does not mean that you're still following him today. You have to choose day by day. It's a long obedience in the same direction, right? You have to choose day by day, I'm going to pursue God. Whereas it seems like Jehoash, I don't know. I don't know what his heart was like, right? But it seems like, I don't know, Jehoiada was just a really good leader, and maybe he was doing more ruling than Jehoash was. And then once Jehoiada dies, you just get to see his true colors. And I think that's like a sobering thing that we all need to like reflect on. There's more I can go into, but since we're wanting to go through it faster, I should probably stop there. Do y'all have any thoughts on that before we jump in? Because I think there's a lot, probably two, that we can flesh out there.
A good example of, I think it's verse 3, where he's partially good and then he starts, going astray, is a parent tells a kid to do something, and then if the parent's not there, they'll misbehave and they'll do what they want to do and not be obedient. But if the parent's there, they'll do whatever they're supposed to do because they.
No, that is a good example. Like with my students, so I teach junior high and high school, and with my junior hires, you see this especially. There are certain teachers that they will obey for. Like if that teacher walks in the room, they'll be saints. They'll be perfect. But whenever those people are around, they're demons, right? They're the opposite. Or like today, I was getting onto a student, and they were just talking back, and they would not listen no matter what I said. Until I said, how would you feel if I emailed your parent? All of a sudden, the blood just drained from their face, and they said, you wouldn't do that. And I'm like, yeah, I would. And they're like, no, Mr. Tate, please. And I was like, here's the issue. You don't feel bad about what you're doing. You feel bad about getting the consequences of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what ties into this right here. Right? That's actually something I say to my students a lot. Because it's all fun and games until you start threatening to give detentions. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, well, okay, that you're not getting the message, right? You just are afraid of the consequences. Those are two different things. But with Jehoash here, he's like that, right? To where it seems like when Jehoiada's around, I'll be a great king. Now, is it because he was secretly rebellious the whole time? No, it might just be that Jehoiada was a really good influence. And whenever that influence disappeared, he had been like codependent on Jehoiada.
His direction was taken away.
Yeah, so like we can't just immediately say, oh, Jehoiada was like Jehoash was a scoundrel from the beginning. Maybe. Or maybe this actually continues to highlight the importance of discipleship. And that whenever you're discipling somebody, you can't just make them reliant on you, right? You have to equip them to be able to hold their own ground, right? But I'm not trying to place the blame on Jehoiada there either, because we just don't know enough about it, right? But it is something just worth highlighting to reflect on. Anyways, so Jehoash did what was right in the sight of Yahweh all his days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. What's the deal with the high places? Like, what is that a reference to? We've read this several times in Kings.
Isn't that like the altars that they burn incense to Baal or any other god on?
Yeah, so basically in ancient cultures, in general, hills or mountaintops were associated with places of worship because, hills are where heaven meets earth. And right here, we don't know for sure whether or not they are sacrificing to pagan gods or what the deal is. The main issue is the location. Because according to Torah, you only offer sacrifices to Yahweh at the place where he is appointed. Right? And so it is possible that maybe they're offering sacrifices to other gods. But they could be offering sacrifices to Yahweh. They're just not doing it Yahweh's way. And that would be an issue as well. Whereas Jehoash should have taken care of that. But keep in mind, this is like a recurring thing we see throughout this story. Like, it seems like every time a king is mentioned that does a good thing, it says, but he didn't take away the high places. And it's very easy for us to criticize that, and we're supposed to. But you also have to consider how difficult that is, right? You're a politician, and you're kind of like, one thing that politicians naturally want to do is keep people happy. And if you all of a sudden say, hey, I know that you like how convenient it is to just walk out your backyard and go sacrifice up on that hill, but get rid of it and travel 100 miles to Jerusalem. Well, people aren't going to like that very much. And so we are supposed to criticize it, but you also have to realize why that in particular is one of the things that doesn't go away. Because it's one thing to be like, hey, you can't sacrifice to Baal anymore. You can't sacrifice your kids. People are more likely to be like, you know what, that's fair. But some of this stuff is just a matter of convenience and just a matter of cultural custom that people just aren't going to budge on. And usually politicians, they just give in. Right? And so it seems like that's what's kind of going on there. But we're going to talk about some of the positive stuff Jehoash does. Then Jehoash said to the priests, all the money of the sacred things which is brought into the house of Yahweh, both the money for each numbered man, the money from each person's assessment in the census, and all the money which any man's heart prompts him to bring into the house of Yahweh, let the priests take it for themselves, each from his acquaintance. And they shall repair the damages of the house wherever any damage may be found. You're looking for plates. Was that water? Oh, water. And it's underneath the pizza box in the fridge. Just like reach over there. Yeah. Okay, so what happens here in verses 4 and 5? It's also a really long sentence.
Census. That's one thing I need.
Is he basically gathering a tax? Kind of?
Yeah. It seems like, just long story short, to get this all down, he's basically saying, let all the priests go out, talk to their friends, and gather money. And what is the money going to be used to accomplish?
Repairing the temple.
Repairing the temple, right? Go out, repair the damages of the house, wherever any damage may be found. And this is the first news that we've heard that apparently the temple's not looking too good.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, we haven't talked about the temple that much. Despite all the attention it received in the early chapters of Kings, it hasn't been mentioned since, I think it's 1 Kings 15. I could be wrong there, but it just hasn't been mentioned at all. And apparently it's because it's been neglected. Not necessarily that nobody's been going there, but people have been too focused on worshiping other gods and doing other stuff, and they've been focused on fighting battles, and they just haven't kept it. It's not as glorious as it was on the day that Solomon, prayed his prayer, right? One thing that we're going to see is that moment when Solomon prayed his prayer was probably the high moment for the kingdom of Israel. And even as we go through the end of 2 Kings, and even when you look at the times of the exile and afterwards, and even by the time you get to Jesus, everybody is still looking back to that moment when Solomon prayed. and thinking, I want to get back to that. Because all the temples they build, they're just not, they don't compare. Even whenever King Herod expands the temple, the second temple and stuff like that, everybody's like, but it's not Solomon's. Toward that moment, it's just like a snapshot of what Israel dreams to be, but they're failing. And it's by their own fault, right? And so Jehoash says to the priests, hey, go gather all the money that is brought into the temple, ask your friends for some money, everybody just get some stuff, and then let's use that money to go and repair the temple wherever damage is found. There is a bit of an issue here, though, because he probably isn't as specific as he should be, right? He should probably tell them, hey, there are certain things that really need to be repaired, and let's focus on that first. Whereas it seems like maybe their priorities are going to be a little bit wrong. But let's move on and let's look at verses 6 through 10.
Now it happened that in the 23rd year of King Jehoash, the priest had not repaired the damages of the house. Then King Jehoash called for Jehoiada the priest and for the other priests and said to them, why do you not repair the damages of the house? So now take no more money from your acquaintances, but give it over to pay for the damages of the house. So the priests agreed that they would take no more money from the people, nor repair the damages of the house. But Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in its lid, and put it beside the altar, on the right side as one comes into the house of Yahweh. And the priest who kept watch over the threshold put it in all the money which was brought into the house of Yahweh. Now it happened that when they saw that there was much money in the chest, the king's scribe and the high priest came up and tied it in bags, and counted the money which was found in the house of Yahweh.
All right. So the story progresses. What happens here?
They forgot to actually repair the temple. They kind of like, Jehoash gave them the order to do it, and they're like, yeah, we'll just leave it for tomorrow, and then the next day, and the next, and the next, and then 23 years later.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, this is very realistic, right? This is what happens. And just from a, I guess, theological perspective, whenever spiritual matters are involved, we're really good at pushing stuff off. Like, I don't want to read too much into it, but maybe we're supposed to. I mean, I know for me, if I'm just picking up a normal book to read, I'll just like sit down and read it. But for some reason, whenever the time comes to read my Bible, all of a sudden, oh, I need to go check Instagram. I need to go use the restroom. It's like I just start pushing it off. It's almost like it's like a spiritual warfare thing where it's like there's like something trying to prevent me from doing this. I don't know if we're supposed to read that into it, but at the very least, it just shows that they didn't prioritize it, right? To where, I mean, or maybe they're like, we're not listening to a 7-year-old, but
It has been kind of an ongoing theme for a while now, is not taking God's word or God's law seriously.
Yeah,
That's been ever since Judges, if not back in Exodus,
Yeah, well, and I think that's just what the focus is supposed to be. It's just saying they didn't care, right? I mean, Jehoiada and Jehoash, they can want for the temple to be repaired, but other people just don't value it as much. And then it takes 23 years. Apparently, Jehoash didn't really seem to care a whole lot because it took him 23 years to be like, hey, didn't I whenever I was a kid, didn't I tell y'all to do something and y'all didn't do it? That's the first command that I gave you. But it just doesn't seem like their heart was in it totally. To where you're kind of forced to wonder, what did they do with the money? Did they just gather it and hold on to it? Did they forget to gather it? I mean, it's gonna kind of talk about it in these verses, but it's just kind of weird. So let's walk through it. Now it happened that in the 23rd year of King Jehoash, so how old is he now? 30 years old, right? That's a big difference, right? So 7 years old. I mean, what grade are you in 7th grade? Whenever you're 7. When you're 7.
Second.
That's second grade,
Yeah.
right? A second grader, and then all the way to 30 years old, right? This is beyond grade school, beyond college, beyond what's that?
I said he's got a whole career now.
Yeah, no, he's 30 years old now. And when the 23rd year of Jehoash came around, the priest had not repaired the damages of the house. And I imagine that probably part of this was him just being patient, being all right. He probably got on there. He's like, guys, When are you going to do it? Oh, don't worry, we're still collecting the money. Yeah, we got it. Or they're probably like over there like spending the money on like the wrong things. It's kind of like, like currently our church has like a leak in the roof and we're like currently getting like a steeple and stuff like that. But there is a temptation sometimes to be like, all right, but a steeple's super expensive. It'd be really cool? Strobe lights. Like, like to where it's like, there are cheaper things which would be like, that would like, that'd be flashier. To where you can almost imagine that like, they're going out and they're spending the money and they're getting like really cool candles for the interior of the temple, but like, it's like, but there's holes in the wall, guys. Like, we need to fix that stuff. We got foundation issues. So it happened in the 23rd year of King Jehoash. The priests had not repaired the damages of the house. Then King Jehoash called for Jehoiada the priest and for the other priests and said to them, why do you not repair the damages of the house? That's a great question. Why do you not repair the damages of the house? I feel like you can get some application out of that question. Right? Think about that. Right? Because keep in mind, jumping forward to where we're currently at, where is God's temple?
His church.
His church, right? We are the temple. And think about like just the implications of, us individually or us collectively as a church, like the amount of sin that we tolerate, or not even just the amount of sin, the lack of discipline that we tolerate, right? The amount of excuses that we will allow fellow Christians to make for why we don't take God seriously, right? It's like, oh, like, I don't know, like, one of the biggest I always say one of the biggest pet peeves. I have a lot of pet peeves, turns out, because I feel like I say that phrase a lot. But a big pet peeve that I do have is how lazy we become. Hey, Sean, can you just go over to the screen and just click remind me tomorrow? One issue that I do have with just how lazy we become as Christians is that the issues that we have nowadays are things that the apostles would have scoffed at, right? Like for us, we're just like, I don't know, I don't have time in my day to read scripture.
Gotta focus on myself.
Yeah, and the apostles would be like, are you kidding me? Like our lives revolved around studying scripture. And that was before they were called to be apostles. Like when they were fishermen, their lives would have still revolved around studying scripture. Like in their culture, that was what education was about. Whereas for us, we just come up with excuses. And then in the early church letters that you read in the New Testament, they're debating about these very difficult decisions on okay, well, how do you make sure that you're not placing a stumbling block before people and stuff like that? Whereas modern Christians are like, I don't know. I don't even know if God exists. Does he? And it's like, are you kidding me? And we're fine with that. In our churches, we're like, that's okay. It's like, I get it. We should comfort people amidst their doubts. But the fact that they even are having those doubts is like, whoa, the bar is so low now. And then as Christians, we can, I don't know, I'll be talking with my students and they'll come to me with an issue where they're like, oh, so-and-so did this bad thing to me. And I don't know. And they're just, and I'm like, so forgive them. And they're like, I can't forgive them. And I'm like, are you kidding me? What they did is so small. And you're going to tell me you can't forgive them. Your intuition should be, I should forgive them. And what you should be struggling through is, how do I forgive them? But we haven't even got there. We're like most Christians nowadays, we're not wrestling through how to forgive the person. We're wrestling through, should I even forgive the person to begin with? Which is from a biblical perspective back then, it's like, are you kidding me? Yes, you should forgive them. You just need to wrestle through how you're going to do it. You know what I mean? It's almost like that meme where it's Sean's gonna know what I'm talking about. The two dogs, yep. Where it's this little cartoon dog. It's
the Doge.
Yeah, the Doge, where it's oh, God gives his greatest battles to his strongest warriors or whatever like that. But then you have the early Christians who are just the muscular dog. I feel like that's what we're dealing with. And that question, why do you not repair the damages of the house? That's a good question for us to ask. We wonder why people are leaving the church. Well, it's because we have allowed the temple to become so damaged and left it in disrepair, and we're content with it, right? Whenever people are turning away from God, rather than telling them we can take God seriously, and rather than defending it honestly and seriously and loving them through it. Instead, we're just like, we're loving them in like a cultural sense. And we're saying, it's okay. It's okay to doubt. And if you need to deconstruct your faith, that's fine. You go do that. Like,
you can't take God too seriously. You look like legalistic Bible thumpers.
Yeah, right? Like, that's the issue. And we are allowing the house to be damaged, right? And then you wonder why people don't take God seriously. Well, imagine, you're a sojourner going through the land of Israel, and they say, yes, we worship Yahweh, the God of heavens and the earth. And he is the most amazing God, and we love him with all our hearts. All right, where do you worship him at? Oh, in that, like, rundown shack over in the corner. It's like, nobody's going to believe them, right? They'd be like, what? This is the respect that you show towards your God? Like, that's ridiculous, but that's kind of how the modern Christian church is, right? To where, if you were just to, like, once again, I'm not talking about how flashy our buildings are, because that, like, the building is not the temple now, right? The people are the temple. And I'm saying that if you're looking at how weak and how immature our faith is currently in our culture, that's not a strong structure. And that building is about to collapse. And I think we see it collapsing, especially like in America, to where like people are just leaving the faith. Yeah, probably so. I don't know. I think that's a good question. Why do you not repair the damage of the house?
I think it's even as Christians, it's easy to ask God for forgiveness and compassion and grace from Him, but giving it to others is a little bit more difficult because it's when somebody naturally hurts us, we want to retaliate, we want to get back at them. So if I do something bad to you, David, your natural instinct is to want to get back. You want to get back at me for doing wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think our issue is that we show grace in the wrong places, right? Like, whenever people harm us, for some reason as Christians, we've decided that it's okay to hold bitterness and grudges and stuff like that. Whereas that's the place where we're supposed to show grace. Whereas we have decided to be gracious to people whenever they justify, like, having weak faith and not wanting to take God seriously. Whereas those are the places where we're supposed to rebuke them and say, like, no, like, this is real stuff, and we need to, like this is where we're supposed to equip each other to be discipled, like to be disciplined, right? I don't want to linger on this too much because we need to get through it, but I've been reading, like, I've been teaching my students James, and I love how blunt James is. Like, James does not pull any punches. Like, he will write to these people in love, and he will say, weep and howl, you sinners, right? You double-minded hypocrites, you fools. Of course you need to live for God, right? And like, he's just like, he's not saying it in hatred. He's saying this is what you need to hear. And I don't know how to navigate that now, because nowadays people are just so sensitive that if you talk to them that way, they would start crying. And they would be like, oh, you hate me. It's like, well, no, I don't. I'm saying this in love. You need a harsh word. But nowadays it's like parents aren't even allowed to spank their kids. And so it's like, well, okay. We're just, I don't know what the solution is. I'm just pointing out that we need to repair the damages of the house, and we need to figure out how to do it, and we need to wrestle through that. Like, those are the questions we need to be wrestling through as a body of believers. Because at the very least, we want to make sure that the people in this group are not contributing to the house falling into disrepair. Anyways, look at that. We're getting some application today. So the king Jehoash, he called for Jehoiada the priest and for the other priests and said to them, why do you not repair the damages of the house? So now, take no more money from your acquaintances, but give it over to pay for the damages of the house. So he says, guys, I have given you 23 years to collect this money. The time for collecting has stopped. Hand over the money and let's get to work. One thing that I do notice is that apparently Jehoiada was also involved with that. So it's not like, Jehoiada's not perfect, because apparently he also was neglecting this, which is crazy because, like, his job as a priest, like, what else are you doing? Since most priestly duties revolve around the temple, especially if you're living in Jerusalem. So the priests agreed that they would take no more money from the people, nor repair the damages of the house. Wait, hold up.
Yeah.
That's weird. I never noticed that. That's a weird thing to agree to, because that's not what he said. What do you think about that, Sean?
I don't know. When I was reading that earlier, I was like, did I read that right?
Yes. That's
It's almost like
It's like, oh yeah, we'll stop taking the money, but we're not repairing the temple.
because they didn't technically agree to hand the money over.
What's that?
So it doesn't say they agreed to hand the money over. They just said they wouldn't take more money. So it's almost like a. I know I'm thinking of it in my head. It's like You either like,
It's one of those like you can't have your cake and eat it too situations. But in my translation, it says the priests agreed that they would not collect any more money from the people and that they would not repair the temple themselves. So they basically just said, we'll stop taking money, but we're not going to do this by ourselves.
Okay. I think I get what's going on here. Like, I think it's more like a Thanos, like, fine, I'll do it myself situation. Where, because he's saying, y'all obviously are not going to do the job, so give me the money so I can pay for it and we'll take care of it. I think that's what's being said. So, like, when it says give it over to pay for it, he's saying, since y'all are neglecting your duty, give it to me and I'll figure something out. I think that's what he's saying. So then it makes sense. They agreed they would take no more money, nor repair the damages of the house. It doesn't seem like they had to agree to the last part since they weren't doing it to begin with. But they're just like, you know what? Fine, we won't repair it. It's like, okay, glad we're all on the same page there. Like, okay. But Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in its lid and put it beside the altar, on the right side as one comes into the house of Yahweh. And the priest who kept watch over the threshold put in it all the money which was brought into the house of Yahweh. So what happens there?
He kind of goes against the order to not collect any money.
Kind of. I don't know if this is intended to be insubordination. I think this is an indirect way of still helping out, if that makes sense. And the main reason why, I mean, unless people just historically been interpreting this incorrectly, mainly because this verse right here inspired like a lot of churches nowadays, right? Because think about it, like even in our church, whenever you're walking into the sanctuary, right, at both doors, what do you have? You have a big box with a hole bored into it for people to donate money.
So I was going to ask if it kind of like inspired offering boxes.
It did, yeah. Like so, then this is where people get the idea. I think what Jehoiada is doing is he's making it a free will offering rather than like by like trying to like force people to do it. Instead of going around and being like, hey, you want to give money for the temple repairs? Instead, it's, hey, I'm going to put this box here. There's a hole in it. You know what it's for. If you desire to give money, so be it. Right? I think that's more the intention behind it. Right? And so he puts it right there as you go into the house of Yahweh. And I want you to notice, like, this is inside the house. Who are the only people who can go inside the house?
The
Priests. I just think that's kind of neat. Because think about it, the priests, like, I haven't really even seen people talk about this that much, but like, where do priests get their income from?
It's their, like, they essentially get it from the tithes.
Yeah, whenever we talk about tithing and stuff in the Old Testament, that money goes to the priests. And that is basically where their income comes from. And so I just think that's kind of cool that it's not like priests had a lot of money. I mean, by the time you get to the New Testament and the priesthood is super corrupt, by then they had a lot of money. But this time, it's not like priests had a whole lot. Yet, the only people who are giving this money are priests themselves, right? So it's like the priests are the ones who are being motivated to fund the repairs of the temple. And so all the money that will be used to repair this thing, it's coming from like genuine hearts, right? Those are the people who are serving, right? Like that's the money you want, right? If these people are willing to donate enough money to make these repairs, that's a good sign, right? Because that means that their heart is invested in it and they're willing, like what little they have, they're willing to sacrifice in order to make the temple look better. That's good. Which in many ways, application-wise, that's kind of what ministry is nowadays, right? If the church is the temple, well, pastors and missionaries and the vocational ministers, they're the ones who are giving what they have. But it's the Peter and John version of Acts chapter 4 or Acts chapter 3. Silver and gold I do not have, but what I have I give to you. The pastors and missionaries, they give themselves, right? And money if they can. But
almost like that widow, and I forget which chapter it is in the Gospels, but she gives like the penny.
Yeah, out of her lack she gave. Yeah. So Jehoiada the priest, he took a chest, he bored a hole in its lid, And he put it beside the altar. On the right side, as one comes into the house of Yahweh. And the priest who kept watch over the threshold put it in, and all the money which was brought into the house of Yahweh. Now it happened that when they saw that there was much money in the chest, the king's scribe and the high priest came up and tied it in bags and counted the money which was found in the house of Yahweh. So what do we see right there? We can summarize pretty quick.
They just take the money.
Yeah. Apparently there was a lot, right? Eventually they looked and they're like, this thing is, there's a lot of money in here. So they tie it all up, they count all of it, and then it is time to get to the repairs. So let's keep on going, 11 through 16.
And they gave the money, which was weighed out, into the hands of those who did the work, who had the oversight of the house of Yahweh. And they paid it out to the craftsmen of wood and the builders who worked on the house of Yahweh, and to the masons and the hewers of stone, and for buying timber and hewn stone to repair the damages to the house of Yahweh, and for all that was laid out for the house to repair it. But there were not made for the house of Yahweh silver cups, snuffers, bowls, trumpets, any vessels of gold, or vessels of silver, from the money which was brought to the house of Yahweh. For they gave that to those who did the work, and with it they repaired the house of Yahweh. Moreover, they did not require an accounting from the men into whose hand they paid the money, in order to pay those who did the work, for they were doing it faithfully. The money from the guilt offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of Yahweh. It was for the priest.
I love these verses right here. Like, to me, this is very encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here we see the repairs going about, right? And we get to see how they use the resources. Let's go through it. And they gave the money. So first off, who is the ones giving the money?
The high priest and the scribe.
Yeah. So it said, it happened when they saw there was much money in the chest, the king's scribe and the high priest. Yeah. So the high priest, king's scribe. Is Jehoiada's just a priest, right? He's not the high priest.
He's just a priest.
Yeah. And they gave the money. Okay. And they gave the money, which was weighed out, into the hands of those who did the work. Right? So they're not just giving it to all the priests, right? They're giving it to the actual people who are going to do the work. They weighed it out, they put it into the hands of those who do the work, who have the oversight of the house of Yahweh. And they paid it out to the craftsmen of wood and the builders who worked on the house of Yahweh. You get the impression that there needed to be some major work done, right? It's not like just small stuff. Like this thing had apparently been left in severe disrepair.
Like foundations.
Yeah, which honestly is really sad, because that means that as we've been going through all these chapters without even realizing it, right? Like I feel like that's narratively important. Like the fact that it was an intentional choice by the author to not mention the temple, because once you get to this, as you're retrospectively looking back at all we've covered, you're almost just supposed to imagine the temple in Jerusalem just slowly rotting away. You know what I mean?
It's like the gradual cultural degrade is kind of reflecting the physical degrade.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair way of putting it. It's just to me that's really sad, to where it's almost like if you were making a movie of 2 Kings. It's you see all this stuff taking place and all this political corruption and stuff, and then you cut to the temple, and it's just the last time you saw it, it looked amazing, and you're like, what happened? And then it's almost there's a flashback, and you just see Solomon he's praising, and he's oh, this is amazing, and it's shining in its glory, and it's a fast montage spanning 100 years. And you see people at first the temple's bustling and everything's going great and stuff, and then slowly but surely less people are showing up, and then all of a sudden stuff starts falling and breaking and nobody's repairing it, and just one priest just goes through there. That's kind of what I picture in my head, and it's sad, but you don't realize it until you get here. You're oh, which also changes how you read chapter 11, right? Because keep in mind, this is where Jehoash grew up. Right, and so no wonder he actually cared about this. This is his home, right? He was in hiding, and he grew up in this temple that was falling apart. But he was being raised by a priest who told him that Yahweh deserves all praise. And he's like, guys, we need to fix this, which I think is honorable, because to me it almost brings to mind King David, right? Where David's God deserves better than this. And so they're hiring everybody. Verse 12. And to the masons and the hewers of stone, and for buying timber and hewn stone to repair the damages to the house of Yahweh, and for all that was laid out for the house to repair it. So it's literally just like a massive overhaul, like just reconstruction project. It really does make you wonder how bad it was. Verse 13. But there were not made for the house of Yahweh silver cups, snuffers, bowls, trumpets, any vessels of gold, or vessels of silver from the money which was brought into the house of Yahweh. What do you think is being highlighted there?
Like they put all the focus on fixing the outer structure, like the actual building itself, instead of, maybe filling it with nicer stuff, newer,
Yeah, no, I think that's probably what is being highlighted. It's just like, okay, this is the main thing. They're focusing on, they're keeping the main thing, which, applicationally speaking, I don't know, I guess I'm in application today. This is also a good thing for us to realize. Like, if we, like, oftentimes what I do see, maybe probably just because I'm on YouTube all the time, like, just looking at what Christians are talking about, stuff like that. People focus on the wrong issues. Like, whenever they're talking about, like they get so distracted by little things, and, like, Christians will debate about, like, these very, like, small things while ignoring the bigger stuff that needs to be repaired, right? We're, like, all about, like, ooh, like there's like foundational issues. Like, there's a lack of just discipleship in general in American Christianity. And, like, people just don't take God seriously, and they don't know what their Bibles say. Yet we're over here debating about, like, were there two angels or one angel at the tomb whenever, Jesus resurrected? Like little things like that. Or, I don't know, just just different denominational stuff, which is valid to talk about. But right now we probably need to be focusing more on being unified than, like, squabbling about, like, little stuff. Or I don't know. Just there's so many things that we are just focusing on the wrong thing, whereas here they focus on the right stuff. Another thing is probably highlighting this. I can't say for sure, but if you go to 2 Chronicles and you read about Athaliah, we actually read that she went and she plundered the temple during her reign, and she took the stuff from the house of Yahweh and she put it in the temple of Baal. And so it could be that it's highlighting, like, that, the place is still going to be kind of vacant, but it will eventually be restored and everything. So that'll all work out. But main thing it's highlighting is that they kept the main thing the main thing. We don't need to be flashy. We need to have a strong foundation, which we'll preach. Verse 14. For they gave that to those who did the work, and with it they repaired the house of Yahweh. So they didn't spend money on flashy stuff, because the money went to the people who actually were going to do the work, right? Kept the main thing the main thing. Moreover, they did not require, this is the verse I love. Moreover, they did not require an accounting from the men into whose hand they paid the money, in order to pay those who did the work, for they were doing it faithfully. What does that mean?
So they sort of, like, the king's scribe and the high priest couldn't obviously give out all the money themselves, because they're just two people and you're hiring out a bunch of workers, potentially hundreds if not thousands, to work on this massive project. So they had to use other people to lend out the money, like other, middle management types. And the problem with those kinds of people is sometimes if they're not doing things faithfully, they can take a little for themselves.
Yeah.
But since the people were acting in good faith and were paying out the workers and not taking any for themselves, they didn't need to keep track of the money.
Yeah.
It was just, everything was going on what it was supposed to.
Yeah. And that's just, like, super encouraging, because, like, we're, like, most of what we've been reading about in Kings is that everybody's just, like, corrupt and unfaithful and wicked and just seeking their own self-interests. Whereas here, they're like, hey, we don't need any receipts. Here's your money. Spend it how you deem fit. Use your wisdom to get the most out of it that you can. Right? Like, that's beautiful. Right? The fact that they would entrust that, which I don't know why I'm in such an application. This is good, I guess. But that's what Jesus does with us, right? To where oftentimes we kind of want, I guess the metaphorical receipt here is that we want God to give us, like, a play-by-play of, like, what do you want me to do today? And what exactly do I need to, like, God, show me your will for me for these 24 hours. Whereas in general, God just calls us to serve him, right? And he kind of gives us the flexibility to do that as we deem fit, and he kind of just trusts that we'll do it. And there's a beauty to that. the issue is that a lot of us can't be trusted with it, and we each fail all the time. But just the amount of trust that shows, right? Like, it's not like Jehoash, like there's a severe issue here. He needs to repair the temple, but he's not being like a control freak who's like, I want to know exactly how you spent every single shekel. He's like, no, I trust you. Y'all have the same heart as I do. Y'all want this thing fixed. Here's your money. Go do it as you deem fit. I just think that's beautiful. I just think it's like, I don't know, like that's an ideal situation. Like that's the type of people you want around you, right? Like whenever, like, it's what synergy. Like, it's just everybody working together to accomplish the same goal. That is that's what God wants for His church, right? That's what He wants for us. Like, He wants us all to be unified. That's what you see in the Book of Acts, right? To where it's just everybody working in unison to accomplish the same goal. And if we can do that, it'd be sweet.
I do think there's a lot of like symbolism, like going back to what Sean said about how the cultural decline of the country was sort of like mirrored by the physical decline of the temple. It's almost like the reverse is happening here, where the act that you're putting all this effort into rebuilding the temple is making people more faithful, and so they don't have, like, there's not as much corruption when dealing with it.
Yeah.
It really shows that, like, God's at play, and He's like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it also makes sense, just given what we talked about last week about what Joash represented to them. You know, whenever he's a 7-year-old boy, being surrounded by like priests and soldiers who are putting their lives on the line to restore him to the throne, like, in everybody's eyes, he represented what Israel could be. You know, like he was, you know, in many ways, he was like the promised one, right? They thought the Davidic dynasty was dead. They thought God had forgotten them. And then 7 years later, it turns out God did not forget them. God still had a plan. God has proven Himself faithful. There is going to be a king who sits on the throne of David. Like just what he represents, like, it would fill them with enthusiasm. And you can imagine that while the priests neglected their job for 23 years, these builders and stuff and artisans, they were aching for the day whenever they got the opportunity to go and, you know, contribute to, you know, the kingdom of Joash, right? Like, so, I don't know, I think that's really cool. Verse 16, the money from the guilt offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of Yahweh, it was for the priests. And so there was money that was set aside for the priests, so the priests were still provided for during this time. All right, I think this should be last slide for 2 Kings chapter 12.
Then Hazael, king of Aram, went up and fought against Gath and captured it. And Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem. And Jehoash, king of Judah, took all the holy things that Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had set apart as holy, and his own holy things, and all the gold that was found among the treasuries of the house of Yahweh, and in the king's house, and sent them to Hazael, king of Aram. Then he went away from Jerusalem. Now the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And his servants arose and made a conspiracy and struck down Joash at the house of Milo as he was going down to Silo. Now Josachar, the son of Shimeoth, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, struck him and he died. And they buried him with his fathers in the city of David, and Amaziah his son became king in his place.
A lot happening.
Yeah, so, sorry, what were you saying?
No, I'm just saying that's a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, honestly, so up to verse 16, you're like, this is amazing. And then verses 17 through 21 are just like a big bummer. You're like, oh, that took a turn. Like, it's like things escalated quickly. Yeah, things got out of hand real fast. Yeah, so whenever we read that Jehoash reigned for 40 years, he didn't die of old age. He didn't die in peace. He actually becomes the first king from the line of David who is killed by conspirators. Which is crazy because his story started off so good. But once again, if you go to Second Chronicles, you'll read more about why, right? Because, like I said, 2 Kings doesn't linger on it very much. But after Jehoiada dies, Jehoash, he just loses his thunder, right? And he ceases to be how he was presented for the first several years of his reign, right? And then he backslides a little bit, and all of a sudden people are like, no, this is not our king, and so they kill him, which is like that's crazy, right? To where his own people conspire against him. That like just the way his story starts and ends are so dramatically different because on one hand, he represented what the kingdom could be, and everybody gathered around just to get him on the throne. Yet 40 years later, people are gathering around him to take him off the throne for the first time ever in the history of I don't know,
It's almost like Solomon in some ways, not like in every single way, because Solomon wasn't killed by conspirators, but like even Solomon had all these chapters devoted to like the building of the temple and stuff, and there was this highlight, and like you said, even like the chapter was it not 11, whatever chapter it was when he prayed, like that was like the highlight of like what Israel could be. But then after, I guess in his Jehoiada was the temple being built. After that, he kind of lost purpose and drive, and then went downhill. In this case, the temple was Jehoiada, and so after Jehoiada passes, he loses his direction, and so he starts falling off, and just has like a kind of a tragic end to his 40-year reign.
100%.
Okay. So I was a little confused by verse 18. So does verse 18 kind of highlight that decline? Because apparently he has a foreign king coming to conquer him, and instead of fighting the king, he's just like...
He sells out.
So
We'll talk about that. What were you going to say, George?
I was wondering, do we know is the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah lost in history?
So the Chronicles of the King of Judah most likely seems to be the books that we have as First and Second Chronicles. I guess it could be that it's a reference to a different book, but given the fact that our book is also called Chronicles and it documents the stories of the Kings of Judah, it seems like that's what we have. But we don't have the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel, for sure. But, let's walk through it for the sake of time. Then Hazael, king of Aram, went up and fought against Gath and captured it, and Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem. All right, we've talked about Hazael before.
This dude's been alive forever.
So tell us about him. Who was Hazael and what did he do?
So he was one of the kings. He was one of the people, I believe, that God had told Elijah to anoint. And he essentially overthrew. It was very anticlimactic, like he smothered his king in his sleep and just sort of ascended to the throne. And then he's been reigning for a long time. We've seen him be very adversarial to Israel in the past few chapters. Just overall not a good dude.
And so all because you're anointed by God doesn't necessarily mean you're a great guy. I mean, look at Jehu, right? This guy, he is a returning character, and he shows up just to give us a snippet of Jehoash's fall. So Hazael, king of Aram, he went up and fought against Gath. Now, Gath is a city that originally belonged to who?
Goliath.
So Goliath is from there, and Goliath was a Philistine, right? And so if you just want to know where Gath is, just in your head, imagine a map of Israel, and whenever you think of the Gaza Strip, it's there, right? Because basically the Gaza Strip nowadays is ancient Philistia. But nowadays we call it Palestine because, that Palestine comes from Philistine. So, Gath is over in there, which tells you that this guy, the fact that he captured Gath is crazy, right? Or that he fought against Gath and captured it. Because Aram is like Syria, right? So it's northeast.
It's on the other side.
It's northeast of Israel. So he went through Israel, through Judah, and captured Gath. And it seems like now he's on a return trip, and now he's heading towards Jerusalem, right? So he's coming back from just like this amazing victory. And Jehoash, and he set his face to go up to Jerusalem. And Jehoash, king of Judah, stood up against him and he said, "You shall not pass." And he fought against him and he says, "This is my God's kingdom. And who is this uncircumcised Aramite think he is?" No, that's not what he does. And Jehoash, king of Judah, took all the holy things that Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had set apart as holy, and his own holy things, and all the gold that was found among the treasuries of the house of Yahweh and of the king's house. And he sent them to Hazael, king of Aram. Then he went away from Jerusalem. Yeah.
He literally bankrupted the entire kingdom of Judah.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like verse 18 is like one of the most damning verses ever. Okay. Up until this point, the only thing that we had to tell us that Jehoash wasn't perfect is, it said, oh, he was faithful until Jehoiada died. And then this happens, you're like, oh, Jehoiada must have died. Yeah, Jehoiada must have died in between those verses because, yikes. You can just tell how the author frames it. Like, the author's trying to highlight the stupidity of this move and also just like the excessiveness of it, right? Like he could just say, and he took a bunch of money and gave it to him. He says, no. I'm going to tell you what he took. He took all the holy things. He could just say that. No. All the holy things that Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had set apart as holy. Oh, that's already a lot. Oh, I'm not done. And his own holy things. Oh, that's a lot. Oh, no, I'm not done. And all the gold that was found amongst the treasuries of the house of Yahweh. Oh, wow. That's a lot. Oh, no. And of the king's house. Well, that sounds like everything.
Everything.
And he sent them to Hazael, king of Aram. Why did he do it?
Because he was scared.
Yeah. Yeah, he was scared.
He
Right?
didn't have faith in God.
Yeah, that's the frustrating thing, right? He spends all this money on making this temple grand, yet he doesn't trust in the God unto whom the temple belongs. Right? There's like this irony to this, right? Like, and it's sad, right? To me, it's almost like it almost feels like Judas Iscariot, almost, to where it's like he seemed to show such devotion, and then what he does in the end is such a betrayal. Where it's like, whoa, like, dude, you spent so many years of your reign focused on collecting money to fund for the temple, and then all because this one dude shows up and says that he's going to fight you, you say, you know what? Let's take all this stuff out of the temple and let's give it to him. And keep in mind, we don't read about it in 2 Kings because it didn't focus on it, but 2 Chronicles, once again, Adaliah had taken all the stuff out of the temple and put it in the house of Baal, and Jehoash is the one who brought it back. And so he went through all this effort to put it back and then just gives it away because one king asked for it. And he's like, I don't want to fight you. I'm scared. All right, here, take all of our money. But it works. And so, Hazael goes away from Jerusalem. Cool, mission accomplished. Yeah, you won, but at what cost? Like that. It's like, okay, congratulations. You could have just been faithful to God and he would have protected you. That would have worked too. Now, the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the books of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? Yes, we've been referencing them a lot. And his servants arose. Like, this is so sad. Like, it's just so unexpected. And his servants arose and made a conspiracy and struck down Joash at the house of Millo as he was going down to Selah. We actually know where the Millo is at. Ben, I don't know if you remember this, but whenever we were in Israel and you're in Jerusalem, right, at the city of David, right? Remember there's an archaeological site? There's this stone, like, it's like a supporting wall, right? It's like just like a big stone, like angled wall that leads up to where like the gift shop is at. That most likely is the Millo. And so like we know exactly where this is at, most likely. That's what people think it is. And so this is in the city of David. It's literally just like right below the temple, like just like a few hundred feet away, right next to where the palace and stuff is at. So the servants arose, they made a conspiracy, struck down Joash at the house of the Millo as he was going down to Selah. Now Josachar, the son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, struck him and he died. And they buried him with his fathers in the city of David, and Amaziah, his son, became king in his place. Yeah, these are just bummer verses, right? I mean, think about it. There's only 5 verses, but it radically changes the whole story. And it kind of makes you want to know more. And so, if you want to know more, go read Second Chronicles. But for now, we're going to wrap up our discussion on 2 Kings because we got something else to do. So, do y'all have any other things that y'all want to mention about 2 Kings chapter 12?
Don't be afraid to do what God wants you to do. You have faith in God.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do have fear, but just give that fear to God and man up and do what He wants you to do.
Yeah.
Do I have to say easier said than done?
Yeah.
Oh no, it's very hard to do.
Mhm.
But honestly, I think Jehoash here is a great example for us to learn what not to do, right? Because he should be a warning to us, just because he had all this potential, but he squandered it, right? And he was even in the previous verses, he was asking the right questions. Why have you not rebuilt the house? Why have you not fixed the damages? Those are good questions. But the issue is, it seems like he himself wasn't focused on the right thing either, right? And so it's like, good job. Like for us, the question, like for application, it's the same, right? Like us repairing the house means we need to take that more seriously. For him, though, it seems like he was just focusing on the superficial stuff. Why have you not made the temple look better? Well, probably because none of y'all value Yahweh as you should, right? If y'all would learn to devote yourself more to Yahweh, maybe everybody would want the temple to look better, and you wouldn't have to be searching far and wide for people who wanted to repair it. But he neglected that, and eventually it caught up with him, and God allowed. Like, think about that. God allowed his anointed one to be struck down. And I think that's probably why the author goes out of his way to mention the two people who did this, because even if Joash deserved what he got, those two people are villains, because they raised their hand against the Lord's anointed, which is not good. And so he says, I'm writing their names down, right? Like, whenever we read about a lot of conspirators earlier in the book against the Northern Kingdom, some of their names aren't even mentioned. It's like, oh, 2 servants rose up and killed them. Here it's like, no, I'm saying their names. I want you to remember that they struck down the Lord's anointed, even if he deserved it.
I'm wondering the slightly bigger picture, slightly bigger picture. So this Second Kings, this is all happening after Saul, David, and Solomon, but way later.
Mhm.
And so it's like a divided kingdom. The whole thing's falling apart, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just wondering, who's writing it? Maybe we don't know the author, but why are they writing it down? Who's going to read it? Is that not
So
the Torah?
most likely the
recipients.
recipients of this book were people in the exile.
Is
Either people in the exile or people who had just returned from the exile. I think, historically speaking, or traditionally speaking, I think that people attribute either Kings or Chronicles to Ezra. I think they attribute Chronicles to Ezra.
Ezra's like a prophet and
Yes, sir.
Jewish people after the exile?
Yeah, I forget who people often try to attribute Kings to. It might even be Hezekiah or something like that. But that wouldn't fully make sense because some of it takes place after Hezekiah's time. But most likely, a lot of this was written to the people having returned from exile, just trying to encourage them, given what they've gone through and stuff like that, and just teach them their history. But yeah, so any other things about 2 Kings chapter 12? Cool.